The cold metal bars of the cage rattled as the sound of footsteps echoed down the narrow, dimly lit corridor. In the far corner of the cell, a young girl sat hunched over, her back pressed against the wall. Her skin was a pale shade of blue, almost ghostly, and her silver-white hair fell in tangled strands around her face. She was small, fragile, but there was something about her quiet strength hidden beneath the layers of fear. She didn't make a sound. She hadn't spoken in days. The guards didn't care. To them, she wasn't a person. She was nothing more than an animal to be caged and sold. Her eyes, wide and filled with a mix of terror and sadness, glanced around the cell, searching for something, anything, to hold on to. In the next cell, the other prisoners were chained and left to suffer in silence. The alien slavers who had captured them were cruel, ruthless beings with no mercy. They saw all the prisoners as nothing more than commodities to be traded, no worth, no value, just pieces of property to be sold to the highest bidder. But the girl wasn't like the others. She didn't belong in this cage. She wasn't meant to be treated this way. She was a princess, a royal from a distant planet, but no one here knew that. No one here cared. She was just another prize for the slavers to auction off to the highest bidder. Her name was Lyra. It meant star in her native language, but the stars felt so far away now. She had been captured during a brutal raid on her peaceful world, taken from her family, her people, and brought to this hellhole of a ship. It had been weeks since that night, and every day felt like an eternity. The hunger, the pain, the loneliness, it all blurred together, a constant reminder of the life she had lost. But despite everything, there was something inside her that refused to break. She had been taught to never give up, to always keep fighting, no matter the odds. Her people, her family, had always believed in the power of hope. She clung to that belief now, even though it seemed like there was no hope left. Her gaze drifted to the small window in the far corner of the cell. The ship was in orbit around a barren planet, and through the glass she could see the swirling clouds, an endless expanse of nothingness. It felt like being trapped in the void, surrounded by endless emptiness, with no way out. A loud clanking noise broke her train of thought. Her heart skipped a beat. The guards were coming. She quickly turned her head, trying to make herself as small as possible. She knew what was coming. Another round of taunts, another round of punishment. But she couldn't stop the tremor that ran through her body. The door to her cell creaked open. Two slavers, tall and imposing, stood in the doorway, their eyes cold and calculating. One of them held a whip in his hand, the long leather tail swinging with every step he took. The other held a tray of food-haven scraps, barely enough to sustain a starving person. "Eat," the slaver with the food barked, tossing the tray onto the floor in front of her. "You're not so special, princess. You're just like the rest of them." Lyra didn't move. She didn't reach for the food. The slaver's harsh laugh echoed in the small cell. He grabbed her arm roughly, yanking her to her feet. "You'll eat when I tell you to," he hissed. Lyra flinched, but she didn't speak. She wouldn't beg. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. Her eyes, though, were full of defiance. She would endure. She had to, just as the slaver was about to strike her. Another sound interrupted the tension. A new set of footsteps approached. This time they were different, slower, more deliberate. There was a weight to them, a kind of authority that made the guards pause. The slavers looked at each other, confused. The one holding the whip stepped back, lowering it. The other slaver stood still, trying to figure out who was coming. A figure appeared in the doorway. It was a human A soldier, dressed in tactical gear, his face hardened by years of battle. His eyes, though, were different. They weren't cold like the others. They were searching, almost as if he were looking for something human. That soldier glanced at the two slavers, who quickly stepped back in deference. He wasn't like them. He wasn't part of their cruel, heartless group. He was here on orders, but it was clear that he wasn't comfortable with what he saw. His gaze shifted to Lyra. She didn't look away. For the first time in weeks, she felt a small flicker of something other than fear. This human, this soldier, wasn't treating her like a piece of property. His eyes weren't full of contempt like the slavers. They were filled with something she hadn't seen in so long. Curiosity. "You," the soldier said, his voice soft but firm. "What's your name?" For a moment, Lyra didn't answer. She couldn't speak, couldn't trust him, but something about him made her want to. So, she whispered the only thing she could say, "Lyra." The soldier's expression softened. "Lyra, I'm going to get you out of here." For the first time in a long while, a spark of hope ignited in Lyra's chest. Could this human really be the one to save her? Or was he just like the others, using false promises to get what he wanted? But for now, she would hold on to that hope. It was all she had left. The first glimpse of hope. The days seemed to blend together for Lyra. She spent her time in the small, damp cell, barely eating, her body weak from hunger and exhaustion. Every time she looked out the small window, she saw nothing but the empty vastness of space. The guards were cruel, their taunts constant, and the sounds of their footsteps as they passed by her cell were like a reminder of her endless suffering. But today was different. She had never seen a soldier like him before, the human who had spoken her name. His eyes had been kind, not filled with hate like the others. There was something in them that made her believe, for the first time in weeks, that there might be a way out of this hellhole, that there might still be hope. Lyra sat against the cold wall, hugging her knees to her chest. She didn't want to believe that the soldier could help her. She had been lied to so many times before. She had been promised freedom, only to be dragged back into captivity. But something about him, something about the way he looked at her, made her wonder if he was different. The guards had left her alone for now. The sounds of their laughter and shouting echoed down the corridor, but Lyra ignored them. Her mind was focused on the soldier. What had he meant when he said, "I'm going to get you out of here"? The door to her cell creaked open again, and her heart skipped a beat. She held her breath, afraid that it was just another guard coming to punish her. But when she looked up, it wasn't a slaver who stood in the doorway. It was him, the human soldier. He stepped inside, his eyes immediately locking with hers. There was no contempt in them, no disgust, just a quiet understanding. He was here again, and this time it was clear that he had a plan. "I'm Alex," he said softly, his voice almost a whisper. "I came back to check on you. We don't have much time." Lyra didn't know what to say. She wanted to speak, to ask him if he really meant it, but the words wouldn't come. She was too afraid to believe in anything anymore. Alex crouched down in front of her, his movements gentle. "You don't have to be afraid," he said, his eyes never leaving hers. "I'm not like them. I'm here to help." She studied his face, trying to read him. His words didn't sound like the lies the slavers had told her. There was sincerity in his tone, something she hadn't heard in a long time. But trust didn't come easily for Lyra. After everything she had been through, It was hard to imagine that anyone would help her without wanting something in return. I can't promise it'll be easy, Alex continued, but I'm going to do everything I can to get you out of here. You don't deserve to be locked in this cage. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to feel the relief of escaping this nightmare. But could she trust him? What do you want from me? Lyra finally managed to whisper, her voice trembling. Why would you help someone like me? Alex's expression softened, and for a moment there was a flicker of sadness in his eyes. I don't want anything from you, he said. Not like the others. You're not an animal, and you're not a prize to be sold. You're a person, Lyra, and I see you. Her heart raced at his words. She had been treated like nothing more than a tool, a prize for the highest bidder for so long. But this soldier, this human, saw her as more than that. He saw her as a person. Could that really be true? Could someone really care? Alex reached into his pocket and pulled out a small piece of cloth. It was a scrap of fabric torn from his uniform. He held it out to her. Take it, he said. It's not much, but it's a start. Lyra hesitated, staring at the cloth. She wasn't sure what to do. She had been trained to be cautious, to never trust anyone. But something inside her, something deep within her soul, told her that this was different. He was different. Slowly, she reached out and took the cloth from him. The moment their fingers brushed, a strange warmth spread through her body. It wasn't just a physical contact. It was the connection she felt with him. A human, someone who wasn't a slaver, wasn't cruel, wasn't indifferent to her pain. Thank you, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Alex nodded, a small, hopeful smile tugging at the corners of his lips. You don't have to thank me. We'll get you out of here, I promise. But as he stood to leave, Lyra felt a pang of fear. She knew the risks. She knew that escaping wouldn't be easy. And there was a part of her that was terrified of what might happen if they were caught. But there was another part of her, the part that had almost forgotten what it was like to have hope, that wanted to believe in Alex's promise. She watched him disappear down the corridor, the door closing softly behind him. Her heart pounded. In her chest, could this be real? Could she really escape? The answer came to her in a rush. She had no idea what the future held, but for the first time in months, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could be free. And that was enough to give her hope. A princess revealed. The hours stretched on, but Lyra couldn't shake the feeling of unease. She had spent so long in captivity, in the dark, cold cell, that it almost felt unnatural to hope. The slavers had promised her freedom before, only to betray her. The walls had always felt inescapable, but now there was a crack in them, a tiny, flickering light that whispered of freedom. Alex's promise still echoed in her mind. He had come back, and he had spoken her name like she wasn't just a number in a long line of prisoners. He had seen her, not just as a captive, but as someone worthy of being saved. But as she sat against the cold stone floor, wrapping her arms around her knees, Lyra couldn't stop the fear from creeping back in. What if he was lying? What if, like all the others, he was just trying to get something from her? The door to her cell creaked open once more. Lyra's heart skipped a beat. This time, she didn't even have to look up to know who it was. She could feel him before she saw him. The air around her seemed to shift, as if the weight of the moment had fallen into place. Alex stood in the doorway, his expression as serious as ever, but there was a glimmer of something else, determination. He didn't look at her like she was a prisoner, like she was broken. He looked at her like she was ... important. Lyra, he said softly, his voice steady and calm. I need to talk to you. Lyra looked up, meeting his gaze. He seemed different today. There was an intensity in his eyes, a weight to his presence. She could sense that something had changed, that the moment was coming. What is it? She asked, her voice hoarse, barely more than a whisper. Alex stepped closer, and for the first time she noticed the faintest hint of hesitation in his movements. You're not just anyone, are you? Lyra's brow furrowed. What do you mean? Alex paused, studying her closely, as if searching for the right words. The way you carry yourself, the way you've resisted everything they've done to you, ... It's different. You're not like the others I've seen in this place. And the way the slavers treat you, it's not because of who you are now. It's because of who you were. Lyra felt her chest tighten. I don't understand. Alex knelt down in front of her, his face inches away from hers. Lyra, you're not just a prisoner. You're a princess, a queen. The words hung in the air, and for a long moment, Lyra said nothing. The world around her seemed to spin. A princess, a queen. She had never thought of herself that way. All she had known was pain, captivity, and fear. The idea that she might be someone important seemed impossible. I don't understand, she repeated, her voice trembling now. How do you know? Alex's gaze softened. I know because of the way you're treated. You're not just an alien to them. You're something more. Something valuable. They want to sell you. They want to strip you of your dignity, your worth. But they don't know what you really are. Lyra's heart pounded in her chest. Her mind raced. She had always known there was something different about her, something beyond the surface. The way the slavers had looked at her, the way they spoke to her like she was nothing. It had never made sense. But now, Alex was telling her something she had never dared to believe. Why didn't you tell me? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Why didn't anyone tell me? Alex hesitated. You were kept hidden. Your identity was kept secret, even from you. They knew the power you held, but they never let you know the truth. They thought if you realized who you were, you'd fight back, and they couldn't have that. Lyra's hands trembled as she processed his words. She had been kept in the dark, locked away like a prize to be sold, her true heritage hidden from her. She had been treated like an animal, like a thing to be controlled, when in reality, she was someone of great importance. But the truth brought with it a new kind of fear. If she was truly a princess, what did that mean for her now? What was her purpose? How could she possibly live up to the expectations of a royalty she never even knew she had? Alex reached out, gently placing a hand on hers. You don't have to do this alone, he said softly. I'll help you. We'll figure this out together. For the first time, Lyra looked at him with something other than fear. She saw the sincerity in his eyes, the same sincerity that had drawn her to him in the first place. He wasn't here to use her, to sell her. He was here to help her reclaim the life that had been stolen from her. I don't know who I am anymore, she whispered. I don't know how to be a princess. Alex gave her a reassuring smile. You don't have to have all the answers right now. Just take it one step at a time. We'll get you out of here first. Then we'll figure the rest out. Lyra nodded. Slowly, the weight of his words sinking in. She was still unsure of herself, still terrified of what the future held. But there was a part of her small, but growing, that allowed herself to believe. Just for a moment, that she might actually have a future where she was more than just a prisoner, more than just a thing to be owned. She was a princess, and maybe, just maybe, she could take back her life. The escape plan, the days that followed, were filled with uncertainty, and yet Lyra felt a sense of urgency building inside her. The slavers had begun making arrangements for her to be auctioned off, and the thought of being sold to the highest bidder made her sick to her stomach. The walls of her cage had always felt like a prison, but now they seemed like a trap closing in on her. The time for escape was running out. Alex had come to see her every day since their conversation. Each visit brought new hope, but also new tension. He never stayed long, and they always spoke in whispers, careful not to attract the attention of the guards. He had told her that he was working on a plan, one that would get her out of here, but he never went into detail. Lyra didn't press him for answers. She trusted him, but she couldn't shake the feeling that the clock was ticking. Today, though, things felt different. Alex had arrived earlier than usual, his face more serious than she had ever seen it. He closed the door behind him quietly, his eyes scanning the room before they landed on her. There was a sense of determination in his gaze, a readiness that hadn't been there before. "I've got it," he said quietly, stepping closer to her cell. His voice was low, barely more than a whisper. "The plan, it's time." Lyra's heart skipped a beat. The words she had been waiting for. The plan. She stood up, her knees shaking slightly, and approached the bars of the cell. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Are we really going to make it out of here?" Alex nodded, his expression hardening. "This is it. I've set things up. We leave tonight." Lyra swallowed hard, the weight of the situation hitting her. She wanted to believe him, to believe that freedom was within her reach. But doubt still lingered, like a shadow in the back of her mind. What if something went wrong? What if they were caught? "Tonight," she repeated, her voice tinged with both excitement and fear. "Yes," Alex confirmed. "Tonight. We'll slip out when the guards are busy. I've already taken care of most of the obstacles, but there's one final step. You need to be ready to move quickly. We can't afford to waste time." Lyra nodded, her heart racing. She could feel the rush of adrenaline starting to build within her. The thought of escaping, of leaving this place behind, was intoxicating. For the first time in so long, she could taste the possibility of freedom. "I'm ready," she said, the words feeling foreign on her tongue. It felt unreal to say them, but there was no turning back now. She was a princess, and she would not spend another day in a cage. Alex smiled, but it was a smile filled with tension. "Good, I'll be back to get you when it's time. Just stay calm, trust me, and we'll get you out of here." Before Lyra could respond, Alex turned to leave. But just before he reached the door, he stopped and looked back at her. "Lyra," he said, his voice softer now, "you're not alone anymore. I promise you that." She watched as he walked out, her heart still pounding in her chest. The reality of what was about to happen was starting to settle in. There was no more time for doubts, no more time for hesitation. She had to trust him, just as he had trusted her. The rest of the day dragged on. Lyra stayed in her cell, pacing back and forth, her mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. She had never been outside this ship, had never seen the vastness of space, or felt the warmth of the sun. Everything she had known had been confined to this dark, cold cell. But tonight, that would change. Tonight, she would be free as the hours passed. Lyra kept her ears trained for the sounds of the guards. She knew their schedule well, but she couldn't afford to make any mistakes. The plan had to go off without a hitch. The moment finally came when the guards' footsteps grew fainter, signaling the start of their shift change. Lyra's heart began to race as she crouched near the door, waiting for Alex's signal. Every sound seemed amplified in the silence, every moment stretching into eternity. She barely dared to breathe. Finally, she heard the faint sound of footsteps approaching. Alex was back. He opened the door quietly, his eyes scanning the hallway before he stepped inside. His expression was tense, but there was also a flicker of relief. He was here. It was time. Ready? He asked, his voice low. Lyra nodded, her hands trembling. She was ready. She had to be. Alex reached through the bars and unlocked the door, the small click of the lock sounding louder than it should have in the stillness. As the door creaked open, Lyra stepped out of the cell, her body shaking with anticipation. For the first time in what felt like forever, she stood on her own 2 feet, free from the confines of the cage. Alex motioned for her to follow him, and she did without hesitation. They moved silently down the dimly lit corridor, the sounds of the guards' voices growing fainter as they approached the exit. Every step brought them closer to freedom, but every step also carried the weight of the risks they were taking. One wrong move, and they could both be caught. But Lyra didn't think about that. All she could think about was the freedom that awaited her on the other side, the future that was finally within her reach. They rounded a corner, and there it was, the hatch that would take them outside, into the unknown. The door was barely a crack away from freedom. Alex paused for a moment, his hand on the hatch. He looked at Lyra, his eyes filled with determination. "This is it," he whispered. "Are you ready?" Lyra took a deep breath, her heart pounding. In her chest, she could feel the weight of the moment. This was her chance, her only chance. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady. Alex opened the hatch, and together they stepped into the unknown. Betrayal in the shadows, the cold wind hit Lyra's face as she stepped outside for the first time in what felt like forever. The hatch closed behind her with a soft thud, and for a moment she couldn't believe she was free. She stood on a metallic platform, surrounded by the vast, empty expanse of space. Stars twinkled in the distance, their distant light offering a glimmer of hope. But the feeling of freedom was short-lived, the danger still fresh in her mind. Alex motioned for her to follow, his movements quick and deliberate. They were on a small, isolated, darker place no one would think to search. Their escape was still fragile, hanging by a thread. They had to keep moving to stay hidden. But for the first time in days, Lyra allowed herself to breathe. They moved quickly, slipping through dark corridors and small passageways. Lyra couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. She had spent so long in that cell, never imagining that one day she would walk freely again. But there was no time for celebration. Every corner they turned, every door they passed, could lead them into the hands of the slavers. Alex led her through a small service tunnel, the hum of machinery filling the air. They came to a small, unmarked door at the end of the hallway. Alex glanced around, his face tense. He didn't speak, but his hand was steady as he reached for the door. Lyra's heart raced. It was almost too easy. Wasn't there supposed to be more danger, more obstacles? The slavers, the guards, they should have been everywhere. So why did it feel like they were slipping through their fingers? The door creaked open. Alex stepped inside first, motioning for her to follow. Lyra hesitated, a sudden sense of unease creeping up on her. Something didn't feel right. She had been taught to trust her instincts, and they were screaming at her to be careful, to stop, to turn back. But Alex was already through the door, his hand extended to pull her in. She took a deep breath and stepped inside. The moment her foot crossed the threshold, a loud, sharp alarm blared. Nitrogen monoxide. Alex shouted, spinning round, his face full of disbelief. It's a trap. Before she could react, a group of armed guards emerged from the shadows, their weapons aimed directly at them. Lyra's stomach dropped as she realized what had happened. The plan Alex's plan had been compromised. From the back of the room, a figure stepped forward, a cold, calculating smile on his face. It was one of the men Alex had trusted, a man he had confided in. Did you really think you could just waltz off with the princess? The man sneered. You've been played, human. Lyra's heart sank. This was the betrayal she had feared. The soldier who had been working with Alex had sold them out. She wanted to scream, to run, but the guards were already closing in, blocking any chance of escape. Get her, one of the guards shouted. Alex stepped in front of her, his body tense, ready to fight. No one touches her, he growled. His hand went to the side of his belt, but before he could draw his weapon, the traitor stepped forward, a mocking look in his eyes. You really think you're a match for us? The traitor laughed. You've been fooled, soldier. This entire operation was set up from the beginning, and now you've led her right to us. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. All this time, she had trusted Alex, had believed in the plan, but now it felt like her world was crumbling. She had been used. She wasn't a princess. She was just a pawn in someone else's game. Why? Alex asked, his voice shaking with disbelief. The traitor smirked, his eyes cold and devoid of empathy. The slavers promised me a fortune for you, Lyra. And you're just another alien princess. No one cares about you, but your worth. Now that's something to be desired. Alex's fists clenched at his sides. You're a monster. The traitor's smile widened. No, I'm a survivor. And now, I'm going to be very rich. Lyra's heart pounded in her chest as the guards closed in. She could feel the cold metal of the room pressing in on her, the walls seeming to shrink. She had never felt more helpless. She thought she was free. She thought Alex was her salvation. But now, everything was falling apart. Without warning, the first guard lunged at Alex. There was a flash of movement, and Alex countered, knocking the guard back. Lyra watched in stunned silence as the chaos unfolded around her. The traitor shouted orders, the guards closing in on them. But Alex wasn't going down without a fight. Run, Alex yelled, his voice urgent. Lyra froze for a split second, torn between staying and running. She didn't want to leave him behind, but she knew that if she didn't act now, they both would be lost. With a burst of adrenaline, she turned and ran, sprinting down the narrow corridor. Her feet pounded against the cold metal, her breath coming in quick, desperate gasps. She could hear the sounds of the guards following behind, their footsteps heavy and determined. Lyra, wait. Alex called after her, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. If she turned back, it would all be over. The sound of the alarms rang in her ears, and the reality of the situation settled in. She had been betrayed, and now she was alone. The final stand. Lyra's heart raced as she dashed down the narrow corridor, her mind flooded with panic. She didn't know where she was running or how she would escape, but she couldn't stop. The alarms blared, their deafening sound echoing in her ears, and the sound of footsteps behind her grew louder with every passing second. The guards were gaining on her. The cold metal walls seemed to close in as she ran, but her legs kept moving, fueled by pure instinct. She couldn't afford to think. She couldn't afford to hesitate. She had to survive. She had to get away. Turning a corner, she found herself in another small hallway, dimly lit and eerily quiet. She came to an abrupt halt, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Her mind spun with confusion, and she realized that she had no plan. She had no way out. The thought of being caught again, the thought of being taken back to that cell filled her with dread. But then she heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps, heavy boots, marching closer. The guards weren't far behind. They were closing. In she glanced around desperately. The hallway stretched ahead, but it was a dead end. There was nowhere to go. The walls were too high to climb, and the small windows were too high to reach. She was trapped. Lyra spun around, searching for anything might help her escape. And then she saw it. A door, partially open, leading into a small, dimly lit room. She didn't hesitate. She sprinted toward it, bursting through the door just as she heard the guards rounding the corner. Inside, the room was dark, filled with old equipment and discarded tools. She moved quickly, ducking behind a large metal crate, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She pressed her back against the cold wall, trying to steady her breathing. The sounds of the guards grew louder, and she could hear their voices growing closer. Where did she go? One of the guards called, his voice thick with frustration. She couldn't have gone far. Another guard snapped, "Fan out and search the room." Lyra's heart pounded in her chest. She couldn't stay hidden forever. She had to move. She had to think of something. But just as she was about to make a run for it, she heard a familiar voice. "Lyra, over here." She froze. It was Alex Dot. Without thinking, she bolted toward his voice, running toward the corner of the room where he stood, hidden behind a stack of crates. He grabbed her arm, pulling her into the shadows with him. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice urgent. He looked over his shoulder, making sure the guards hadn't seen them. "I'm fine," Lyra whispered, her voice shaky. "But they're right behind us. We have to go." Alex nodded, his jaw clenched. "I know, I've got a way out, but we need to move fast." Without another word, he pulled her toward the back of the room, where a small, hidden door led into a service tunnel. Lyra's pulse quickened as they moved through the dark, narrow passage, the sound of the guards' voices still echoing from the main hallway. They reached a small door at the end of the tunnel. Alex unlocked it quickly, and they stepped out into a dimly lit alley, the outside world barely visible in the distance. The air was thick with tension. "We're not out of the woods yet," Alex said, his voice low. "We've still got to get past the main gates." Lyra nodded, her mind racing. They weren't safe. Not yet. But the door was open now. The way forward was clear. She could feel the weight of her situation pressing down on her, but she wasn't going to stop. Not now. They sprinted down the alley, dodging behind crates and barrels, trying to stay out of sight. The quiet of the night was pierced by the occasional shout from the guards, but Lyra kept her eyes forward, focusing on the goal. The sound of the gates came into earshot, the giant doors that would lead them out of the facility into the unknown. The weight of their escape was heavier than ever. They couldn't afford to be caught now. As they neared the gates, they ducked behind another stack of crates. The guards were still searching for them, but the area was mostly empty now. Alex's face was set in determination as he glanced around, checking for any sign of movement. "We're close," he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. "Just a little farther." Lyra's heart pounded in her chest, her breath quickening as they crept closer to the exit. The main gates were only a few feet away now, and they could hear the hum of the security system nearby. Alex stopped for a moment, his eyes scanning the area. "Wait here," he whispered. "I'll take care of the security. Stay down." Lyra nodded, crouching low behind the crates. She watched as Alex moved toward the control panel by the gates, his fingers moving quickly over the buttons. He looked calm, focused, but she knew it couldn't be that easy. There was no telling how many guards would be on the other side once they breached the gates. And then it happened. The door clicked open. The gates slowly began to lift, their heavy metal groaning as they moved. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. It was working. They were getting out. She could already see the stars above them, the vastness of space stretching out in front of her. "Let's go," Alex said, his voice urgent. They ran through the opening, Lyra's feet pounding against the ground. The wind whipped past her face as they moved into the open space beyond the gates. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt the taste of freedom on the tip of her tongue. But they weren't safe yet, not by a long shot. The sound of footsteps echoed behind them, and Lyra knew that the slavers weren't going to give up that easily. The fight wasn't over, but for now they had a chance. They were free, but the final stand had only just begun. A new beginning. The cold, open space around Lyra felt overwhelming, the vastness of the stars stretching out before her like an endless sea. She could feel the ground beneath her feet, solid and unyielding, but everything else seemed uncertain. Like a dream she wasn't sure she was ready to wake up from. She had escaped. They had escaped. But now what? The last few hours had been a blur of confusion and fear. And even though she was no longer locked in a cage, her mind raced with uncertainty. Where would they go now? What would happen to her? To Alex? Her heart pounded in her chest as she glanced around, looking for anything familiar. But there was nothing. The galaxy was so much bigger than she ever imagined. Her entire life, she had been confined to a small corner of it, forced to live as a prisoner. Now she was free, but freedom came with a heavy price. Alex moved swiftly beside her, his eyes constantly scanning the area, his hand resting on the gun at his side. The night was still, but the weight of danger still hung in the air. They weren't out of the woods yet. Lyra could sense it, the sound of movement just beyond the horizon, the distant hum of engines in the dark. The slavers wouldn't give up. They would chase them to the ends of the galaxy if they had to. "We need to find shelter," Alex said, his voice low but urgent. He turned to Lyra, his expression unreadable. "It's not safe out here in the open." Lyra nodded, her thoughts racing. Where could they go? Where could they hide? She had no idea. She had no resources, no allies. Everything she had once known seemed to have vanished in an instant. She was nothing but a runaway princess in a vast, unknown universe. And yet, ... there was a spark inside her. A spark of something she hadn't felt in so long. Hope. For the first time since the raid on her home planet, she had a chance. A real chance. She wasn't a prisoner anymore. "I know a place," Alex said, breaking her thoughts. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, like he had already thought ahead. "It's not far. We can get there before dawn." Lyra followed him, her legs tired but her mind alert. She didn't speak. What could she say? She had no idea what lay ahead, but the uncertainty didn't paralyze her. It motivated her. She had been locked in a cage for too long. Now she would fight for her freedom, whatever it took. As they moved through the darkness, the weight of their escape hung heavily in the air. Every sound, every step, every breath felt louder than before. The vastness of the space around them reminded Lyra of her place in its more vulnerable, but the fire inside her burned brighter than ever. She would not let this be the end of her story. They reached a small abandoned station tucked away in a hidden corner of the shipyards. It was old, but sturdy. Alex had been here before, Lyra could tell. He knew the layout, the hidden entrances, the perfect spots to stay out of sight. Inside, the station was dimly lit. The quiet hum of life support systems barely audible. They found a small room near the back, untouched by time. The walls were lined with old, dusty equipment, but it felt safe, secure. Lyra collapsed onto the small cot, her body aching from the events of the past few days. She hadn't realized how exhausted she was until she sat down. The adrenaline that had carried her this far was slowly wearing off, and the reality of their situation began to sink in. She was free. She had escaped. But now the real fight would begin. Alex stood by the door, his hand on his weapon, his eyes constantly alert. Lyra watched him, her mind turning over everything that had happened. "Are you okay?" Alex asked, his voice softer. Now, a hint of concern breaking through the usual stoicism. Lyra hesitated. I don't know what to do next." Alex didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked over to where she sat, his eyes thoughtful. "You don't have to have all the answers right now. You've been through a lot, but you're safe for now. That's all we can do, survive. And once we've done that, then we can think about the rest." Lyra nodded, absorbing his words. He was right. There was no use in worrying about the future when they had barely escaped the present. But deep down, she knew one thing for sure. This was just the beginning. "I don't even know who I am anymore," Lyra said quietly, looking down at her hands. "Everything I thought I knew, ... It's all gone." Alex's expression softened. "You're still you, Lyra. No matter what's happened, you're a survivor. And if you choose to, you can be more than just a princess. You can be the leader your people need. The world outside these walls, this galaxy, it needs people like you." Lyra stared at him, his words sinking in. She had never thought about it like that. She had always been the princess, always bound by the expectations of others. But now she had a chance to shape her own future. "You really think that?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I know it," Alex said firmly, a small, reassuring smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "You're not just a captive anymore. You're free, and that freedom gives you power." Power, the word hung in the air between them. Lyra had never thought of herself as powerful. She had always been a pawn in the hands of others. But now, for the first time, she saw the possibility of something greater. A new beginning, a new life. Her heart filled with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt before. It wasn't going to be easy. She had a long road ahead of her. But the path was open now. She could walk it, make her own choices, decide her own future. "I'm not giving up," Lyra said, her voice steady, the fire inside her reigniting. "I'm going to take back what's mine, and I'm going to make sure no one ever treats me like that again." Alex smiled, his eyes proud. "I believe you." For the first time, Lyra felt something deep inside her stir. It was a quiet strength, but it was there. And as she looked out into the stars, she knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning.